Hey there, welcome to the Breakthrough Creative. I'm your host, John McDavitt, and this is the place where we talk about the business of art and the art of business. My guest today is Mikey Wheeler. He is a tattooer. I don't call him tattoo artist because there's a reason for that, and you'll learn that in the episode in a bit. We follow him on his trajectory toward becoming a professional tattooer. Really cool guy and really, really interesting story, and lots to be gleaned from him. So before we get into the episode, will you please subscribe to the channel and hit the little notifications button if you are watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please go ahead and give the show a follow. And if you could leave a 5-star rating and a written review, that would be appreciated. Without further ado, let's get into our interview with Mikey Wheeler.
My name is Mikey Wheeler. I'm a tattoo artist in Kansas City, Missouri. Been living here now for a little bit over 10 years. After living in Columbia, Missouri for about 20 years, started my tattoo career and apprenticeship out there. But I was originally born here in Kansas City, so it's kind of been an out and back life. But yeah, I've been here at Windhorse Tattoo now for going on about 2 years. Was at Mercy Seat Tattoo prior to that for about 10 years.
Okay. Was it a big move between Columbia? I don't know where Columbia is compared to Kansas City.
Columbia is 2 hours east. So you got Kansas City, 2 hours east from there is Columbia, 2 hours east from there is St. Louis. So right
Okay.
dead in the middle of Missouri, University of Missouri, Mizzou Tigers. And basically my mom moved myself and my little brother, the three of us, out there in '89. So she could go to the University of Missouri and go to school there. And just like the school system in Columbia is really, really proactive and very diverse. And she felt like that would be a good environment for us to grow up and learn in. And I was really grateful to grow up there. Made a lot of really good friends there and kind of started doing everything that I continue to do to this day out there. So I definitely have a pretty serious connection to that town and really always will. My mom still lives there. So
Oh, that's awesome. What did your mom go to school for?
a myriad of things. She kind of continues to go to school to this day to some extent. Initially it was interior design. She found herself working with engineers and architects up to a certain point. She went back somewhat recently to go to the J school after kind of traveling around herself a little bit. She lived out in Chicago actually for about 3 years, working for a company out there that transferred her from Kansas City. And she inevitably, once she retired from that company, she moved back to Columbia to go back to school again. So she's kind of like a lifelong student and lover of learning things. She's a very, very active, very educated person, and definitely a huge influence on me, for sure.
That's awesome. So, and she sounds like she's got a creative thread in her, huh?
Absolutely, yeah. That kind of is prevalent in my entire family. I've got three brothers. We're all artists and musicians. Different variations of that. My grandma is a really great piano player. But yeah, my mom, everything from drawing to painting to photography, plays a little music herself, has played guitar and flute in the past and stuff like that. So it's just kind of, I grew up around art and music, and it was just kind of bound to find its way in, you know?
So, so that's really cool, right? I mean, you're a little guy, and you're already so. As far as your brothers go, where are you at in the line?
Like younger middle. So I've got a
Younger
little
middle.
brother and two older brothers.
Okay, so you had a couple guys ahead of you. Your mom's there, grandma. Usually the younger ones. It seems like if you've got older siblings, younger ones come along a little more quickly, right? Because
Sure.
they're seeing their brothers or siblings do stuff, and then you're surrounded by all this creativity. So how did that, I mean, I'm assuming that was kind of the starting point for you that got you from there to here. Like, what's your story between now and then?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I really remember is just drawing all the time. Like I did it, my little brother did it, my older brothers did it. It's obviously pre-internet. Like we're in that era of people. We remember doing things before the internet, before we all had cell phones and stuff like that. So you would go out of your way to kind of entertain yourself, and we didn't have a lot of money. We weren't a wealthy family by any means, but there was always paper and pencils and colored pencils and markers and stuff like that. And so early on, my mom kind of guided us into drawing. We get these like booklets that had tracing paper and little parts of characters you could like put together, like pick some of these heads and pick some of these bodies and pick some of these accessories and make your own little like cartoon character kind of thing. And it seems really kind of silly and trivial now, but like it was the beginning of kind of like choosing how you wanted to explore art, instead of, it wasn't just even doing things from your imagination. It was like observing options and kind of going this way as opposed to that way, depending on the mood at the time. But yeah, it was just reams and reams of computer paper and like all the materials we could get our hands on. And that was every day. That's just kind of what I inherently was gravitating towards doing, as opposed to like playing with toys and stuff. We all played with toys like normal kids, but there was a lot more art than that, I think.
What did you like to draw?
Well, we grew up with cartoons, Disney cartoons. That still is a consistent thread in my life and my wife's life. We're big Disney fans. So there was an emotional connection there for sure. Just kind of the connection between art and storytelling. And so cartooning was the first big thing. And then as I got a little older, that immediately transitioned into comic books. It was a natural transition. It's like, okay, this is still essentially cartoon characters and storytelling, but now we've got slightly more adult themes. We've got some action. We've got some intensity that maybe by no means what I say is lacking in Disney. It's just a different style. So you start to gravitate towards different styles as you get older and as your tastes change. You kind of move from one thing to another. And then it all comes back around later when you like get older and learn that you actually appreciate it all, even if you kind of moved past something temporarily. So comic books was the next thing. And that's initially like as an artist, maybe thinking about pursuing art as a living someday. I think comic books was the first thing that I actually thought I might try my hand at doing, which never happened. Tattooing happens, but that was the path initially, I think.
A really important question. Were you Marvel guy, a DC guy, or kind of off-brand, or everything?
It's funny. I was having this conversation with a client last night, actually. He asked me if I'm excited about the new Batman film coming out, which I am. And it generally speaking, I'm a Marvel guy, X-Men specifically. So I'm also excited about the potential of future Marvel Studios X-Men movies, because I'm not the biggest fan of the current line of X-Men movies. But Batman's my favorite character, and he's obviously DC. So I was never that big into DC as a franchise, but Batman specifically, and it probably had a lot to do with the animated series when I was a kid. That was the first like real merging of the things I grew up with: cartoon, comic book character, really, really well done. There was the X-Men cartoon, obviously, which was big, but it wasn't a very well done cartoon. I still have like a soft spot for it, but the animated series was a really artful, really well executed thing, and it's very well respected for that matter. So, and then the Tim Burton movies, like as a kid in the 90s, Tim Burton was a big deal. So those first two Michael Keaton movies. So Batman really stuck. Obviously, he has the best villains. I don't think that's even arguable. So that was kind of it. It was Marvel fan, Batman fan on top of that.
That's awesome. You must have read Kingdom Come, right?
For sure.
That's
Absolutely.
like, I'm not a huge comic book guy. I've always appreciated comics and kind of from a little bit of a distance, but man, that is just to me, that's the best I've seen.
It's really cool, man. And I wish at this age I had more time to even like explore graphic novels further, and that's kind of one of the things I sort of moved past. But I still have like the 12-year-old in me still kind of like loves comic books, and I guess I experienced that through the films now more than
Yeah.
anything. Yeah,
Yeah. It's easier to take a 2 hour block of time, right?
it is. That's the time allotted in my life for comic books. It's 2 hours like once a month, I guess.
That's awesome. So there, it sounds like you were at a certain age around comic books where, and maybe it was younger, so don't let me put words into your mouth, but where you said to yourself, "Oh, I think I want to make a living doing this."
Sure. As much as you like really start thinking about that when you're 12, you know. But I grew up with a single mom who worked really, really hard on top of going to school. So, and I was, responsible for like maybe more chores and like kind of helping out than the average 12-year-old for that reason. So at a relatively early age, it was clear to me that like life, especially as you got older, meant working and working really hard. So that wasn't lost on me. So I think while maybe some of my friends were still being every part of 12, I was starting to be a little more forward thinking, or at least like conscious of the fact that at some point I was going to have to figure out what it was I was going to do. And up to that point, art was the most consistent part of my life. It's a really big basketball fan. I love playing basketball. That was like kind of the physical athletic thing I did. And the idea of being a professional basketball player was really appealing for a lot of reasons, but I'm not that kind of athletic whatsoever. That wasn't going to happen. So art seemed like the thing that the most feasible option and something I could explore further and kind of turn into something eventually.
Very cool. So, mom had a huge influence. Your family life had a huge influence in shaping the direction. Any teachers, anything at school that really struck you that encouraged you on?
So art teachers, I've had great art teachers just like everybody else. But I don't even know that there was like a specific art teacher that kind of pushed that love for me further. But there were a couple teachers just throughout my public school experience that offered a lot of like guidance and support, just on a personal level. Um, my I think fourth grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Schaefer who just was very like warm, very kind woman who kind of made class an inviting place to be. Just you had to go to school, and most kids aren't necessarily eager to go to school per se. They'd rather be at home drawing and playing with toys and stuff like that. But I do remember her standing out specifically as like, well, at least I get to learn from this person. This person makes this fun. This person makes this, like, yeah, a warm experience. And funny enough, years and years later, I ended up being in a metal band with her son, Joe, who is a really, really great guy. And we had some conversations about his mom and how like I just loved having her as a teacher. And he's like, yeah, like I get that a lot. Apparently everybody that had his mom as a teacher like remembers that experience. So there are teachers like that really, really stand out. And I'm sure there have been others. But school is tricky for me. I didn't love being in school, but I still inherently like understood the necessity for it and the importance of it. So I actually moved out of my mom's house and got a place with some friends this summer year before my senior year of high school. So I emancipated myself before I was done with high school. And my mom and my little brother actually ended up moving to Rockford, Illinois after that for a job opportunity. And she obviously invited me to go along, but it was clear to her I wasn't going to do that. I had just moved out. And at that point, I'd already started a tattoo apprenticeship. I had started playing in bands. I kind of had my thing set up, and this is obviously still in Columbia. So I stayed behind, and I ended up finishing my senior year of high school. I was working, I was doing all of these other things I just said. But even though I had emancipated myself and technically didn't have to go to school anymore, I made it a point to finish high school. I had gotten that far. And again, even though it wasn't like my favorite thing to do, I knew inherently that it was something I needed to do. So,
Yeah.
so the teachers that had an impact instilled that in me. My mother obviously instilled that in me, being like kind of very education centric and focused. And I decided that the least I could do was finish high school. So
Yeah.
that's what happened. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Like I mean, you had discipline in you, and it sounds like you listened to people as you were
Yeah.
growing up. Like you took it in. Was the emancipation a legal emancipation?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It was, it came from typical teenage stuff. I was a jerky 17-year-old teenage kid. I was
Right.
stubborn and wanted to do what I wanted to do. And at that point I had already like worked some part-time jobs in the summers to help pay bills in the house, to help my mom successfully raise me and my little brother. And after a couple of years of that, you start thinking, well, like if I can do this in this home, why can't I do this in my own home and play by my own rules and just live my own life? I always kind of think of it the same way. It's like, yeah, my mom instilled like this value system of discipline and hard work to the degree which it almost backfired later. She kind of prepared me to just go do my own thing. So there, at that point we were arguing a little bit because I was, again, just a 17-year-old boy who makes things difficult for everybody for no reason. And I chose to do that one day when she was at work. I just moved out while she was at work. And instead of being upset, she basically just called me. I had left a phone number of where I was going to be, where the house I was moving into with my friends. And she called me when she got home and just made sure that I was okay and asked if I needed anything. And it was just like, I think you're doing the right thing and I think you're going to be fine. And that was the extent of that. And that was it. We've been best friends ever since. Like she got it, she didn't want to see me leave, but she had done her job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So because she did, I was successful and we've had a successful relationship ever since.
Wow, it's an amazing and unusual story, but it's also it's really cool because sometimes, well, maybe more often than not, you hear that stuff just breaks bad, right? It's like
Absolutely.
relationships are broken,
Yeah.
people kind of crash and burn. But it sounds like she and your family, just your situation prepared you so well. And what's really cool about the couple of teachers you were mentioning and your mom is it sounds like there was a lot of encouragement where people conveyed their belief in you. And as I get older, I almost think that encouragement and lifting people up with words, right, is almost more important than anything else. Because if they really want to find their way, if they want to get good at their craft, they'll do that. But the encouragement thing and words are so powerful. I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, it's 100% right. Literal talent, people are born with talent and you can obviously improve skill. But none of that means anything if you don't have a support system.
Yeah.
So you can be swimming in talent all day, but have a lot of self-doubt and a lack of motivation because you don't feel like anybody cares.
Right.
So yeah, that's absolutely right. Like, regardless of the potential you're born with or how hard you're interested in pursuing that and working on it, the people in your life that are there for you to like kind of point you in the right direction and do just that, like, kind of give you a little nudge when maybe you're feeling a little doubtful, or even more so, like, kind of pat you on the back when they feel like you've accomplished something. It sticks with that person. I've got a guitar student right now. It's the first time I've ever had a guitar student. My friend Mark's son Luca has become a really good friend of mine, and it's just been an incredibly rewarding experience because he's into metal and I play metal guitar, and so we have that in common. But my favorite part about sitting with him and teaching him is not only passing along, like, a mutual love of the music, but watching him succeed at small things, and then my ability to confirm that he has done just that and tell him I'm proud of him, and just kind of watch how quickly that turns into the next thing. You give somebody that little bit of motivation and all they want to do is get to the next thing, as opposed to be like, well, I'm not doing it fast enough. It's like, no, you do it in your own time. It's just the fact that you're doing it at all. And that's, I think, at the core of all of that, for sure.
That's awesome. And that's great teaching. That what you're talking about, the it's bite-sized, it's encouragement with bite-sized bits of the craft.
Yep.
Here's how you put your fingers on for this chord, and just practice it back and forth. You're going to build up a muscle memory, all that stuff, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's the magic sauce. That's such good stuff, dude.
Yeah, it's all about incremental. Like, I regularly encourage him to not be in a hurry.
Yeah.
Getting good at something isn't getting there the fastest. It's getting there the right way. And everything is incremental. All of our favorite artists and musicians and creatives, like, they got there just as slowly as the next person, but they just had somebody to encourage them to get there. And no one ever sees the whole journey there. They just see the end result, and they're like, this person's a genius or whatever. It's like, this is a person who just wanted it. You know what I mean? And behind every person that wanted it are supportive people, I think.
Yeah, that's really good. And I would even say, like, there's something about, well, whether it's positive or negative, right? What are you filling somebody up with? And at some point, we've all got that negative judge talk, right? That happens in our heads.
Sure.
But if you've got, like, these people who've believed in you, it's almost like it's poured into you, and it doesn't go away. Like, it just is in you, and you can access it when you need to. Because if you've had people who believe in you or have encouraged you, then it just becomes a part of your paradigm. It becomes a part of your belief system, and it's almost like nobody can take that away.
Yeah, I think it gets woven into your personality to an extent too, and it makes you want to pass that along to the next person as well. Yeah, I think it's like a chain of motivation from like generation to generation. It's at the core of people making the next people, right?
Right.
That's why teachers are inherently so important, whether it's literally a teacher by profession or just some 40-year-old dude teaching a kid metal. Like, it's still passing along a love of something, and the spirit of, like, progression. And that's what matters, for sure.
And it is generational. That was a great term, because that stuff does pass along, even if it's like 2 generations before it impacts. So let's go back to high school. So you're talking about you're playing music, and then you had started an apprenticeship as a tattoo artist. So correct. How did that come about, Mikey?
That in a manner that wouldn't happen nowadays, for sure. So we briefly, before you got the ball rolling on this, we're just discussing the tattoo TV shows that everyone's so familiar with now. This was a little bit before that had occurred. So we're talking the late 90s here. And I got my first tattoo when I was 17. So, like, basically right before I moved out, so that like summer before my senior year. I basically just harassed my mom about getting a tattoo for like 2 or 3 years. And she finally said yes when I was 17. I guess my grades were good enough to justify that. And I got tattooed a couple times by a guy in downtown Columbia. And then there was another guy named Jason who moved to town from California to open a shop right around the corner from the Subway sandwich shop I was working at.
Yeah.
So I met this guy by, like, feeding him sandwiches. He would, like, come around the corner and get Subway every day. And he noticed I had a couple tattoos, and he's like, "Those are nice. Those are nice. And would you ever be interested in coming around the corner and let me tattoo you at some point?" You know, he's new to town and trying to build clientele, trying to meet people, and noticed I was a young person and probably knew other young people, so this was probably like a strategic move on his behalf. But we had kind of befriended each other, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll totally collect from other tattooers. I just plan on having many." So I started getting tattooed by him, and at some point he asked me essentially like why I liked tattoos, what got me interested in tattoos. Again, in the late '90s, like I basically looked like Home Alone era Macaulay Culkin, like not the first person you'd imagine to be covered in tattoos. Is like a little bit of an enigma there. So I think he was just like, "What's your deal, dude?" And my only answer was like, "Well, I've been drawing my whole life. I love art. I love comic books. I love music. All my favorite musicians have tattoos. It just seemed like that made sense for me." He's like, "Oh, I'd be interested in seeing some of your art sometime. I'm curious kind of what you do." And was not expecting that question. Like, didn't really have a portfolio to speak of, just kind of like bits and pieces of things I had kept over the years. So the next time I got tattooed by him, I brought whatever I thought was worth looking at, kind of nervously showed it to him. I was like, "Is this what you meant? I don't know. What is this? Is this anything?" And he offered me an apprenticeship.
Wow.
And from what I said earlier, it's like that wouldn't happen that way now. There's far too much of an interest in becoming a tattooer. There's far too much of a demand for apprenticeships now for a pre-established tattooer to just offer some kid an apprenticeship. It would never happen. So it was very much a time and a place thing. I got in kind of like right at the end of tattooing being almost entirely, I don't like to use the word counterculture, but for lack of a better term, before it was like by any means a popular thing to do. There was no shows. It still kind of had a stigma that it was really just kind of sketchy people that got tattooed, like bikers and drug addicts and ex-cons and stuff. All the stereotypes, but it hadn't really escaped that stereotype too much yet. That changed drastically over the next few years. Once the TV shows started coming out, it became like a more commonly accepted thing. And now, this many years later, everybody has tattoos. Like every demographic, every type of person. It's not an odd thing to do on a daily basis. It's just as normal as going to your dentist. It's
Right.
That's happened recently. That's a very recent change. So I came into it in a weird spot and have kind of watched it mutate and evolve over the past 20 years.
Would you say that it's really become mainstream? Like, is it the last 10 years, 5
Yeah.
years? Like, okay.
Definitely the last 10 years, significantly so the last 5 years. And then you had Instagram come in, which I would say is probably for most artists, but definitely for tattooing and the tattoo industry, it expedited that dramatically. So now everybody follows all the tattooers and follows all the shops, and it's in everybody's feeds. They see it all day, every day. Everybody thinks about tattoos that it has any interest in it at all. It just shows up in their daily lives on a regular basis. Everyone you see out in the world has tattoos. Kansas City is an incredibly heavily tattooed community as far as like per capita. It's usually amongst the most tattoo cities in the country. Wow. So it is not abnormal to walk around Kansas City and just see people with more tattoos than I have, and they don't even do tattoos. They probably like they're a mechanic or something. They're just like covered. So yeah, it changed. It'll never be the same again, and I think that's for the best. It didn't need to be this like secret that only like a few people kept. Like it was bound to head this direction. It was just a matter of time.
Well, social media has really done that for so many walks of life, right? And I would say, maybe, I don't know, I don't know if this is a true statement, but maybe in particular for artists, because I can't get over just the skill and talent that I see everywhere on Instagram or on Facebook or wherever you go. There, people are good, like really good.
Yeah, absolutely. You're drowning in this wealth of information, and this overwhelming like mass population of like you said, talent, just raw
Yeah.
talent out there. And it definitely for all artists, it expedited everything. And I would say, and it's probably the exact same thing regardless of what art industry you're talking about. But the best example I can give you in the tattoo context is like in the late 90s, even the early 2000s, you knew who the big players were in the industry. You heard the names. You had this kind of like this concept of who these people were. So if you wanted to see this tattooer's newest work, you had to wait till it came out in the tattoo magazine. There's a handful of tattoo magazines, and it eventually came out, and you're like, holy crap, this person, whoever this tattooer is, did this on a person. This is incredibly inspirational, but that tattoo is now at this point like 6 months to a year old, right? Like that's how long it took to get to finished, photographed, published in a tattoo magazine. That's the quickest you could get that information. Now, the best tattooer in Japan does a tattoo and posts it, and you see it a minute later.
Lickety split, yeah.
Just apply that to anything. Like the sharing of information, the sharing of progression, the sharing of pushing a medium forward is instantaneous.
Yeah.
There's no way that doesn't expedite everything for everybody. It's just that's how that works. Yeah.
Well, it's like being the second little brother, right? And then you got the two ahead of you, and you're like, hey, I'm going to follow them and go more quickly. Yeah.
You pick up that trail, and it's just right there in front of you, and you have the opportunity to learn from it immediately. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So let's go back then to now you're an apprentice. Like, what was that experience like for you? And by the way, was music a possibility at this point? Was that something that you were thinking might be your trajectory?
So music's always been just as important to me as tattooing, as far as like an expression of like who I am as a person. Like music's incredibly important to me. I love playing guitar. I love being in a band. I've been in a functional band of some sort that plays live shows and releases albums since I was 15, pretty much nonstop. My current band is just now wrapping up an album that we're going to put out next year. So it's an ongoing thing. And it's really valuable to me, but I don't know that, especially in the past, that I ever like really had an inkling that would be the profession. In my 20s, I was in a band that toured a lot and recorded a lot, and probably was the closest up to this point at like pursuing something of that nature. But I always felt that like there were a lot of roadblocks. There was a lot of hangups in the music industry to really try to be successful at it, and then to maintain success at it. So it's one thing to like break in the first place, but another thing to like kind of make a long lasting career out of it with all the obstacles and the things that were out of your control. I think that's the biggest point, is like there's so much that's out of your control, but that's just my limited knowledge of the music industry.
I think it's pretty wise, just because, I mean, I can't believe I've got Spotify on my computer and I can listen to anything. Yeah. And I almost feel a little dirty about that, because
I do the same thing.
Because I know the artists aren't getting paid what they deserve. Like it's a thing. So that's I mean, that's not cool. The trajectory of your story is cool. So anyway, I'm sorry, back to apprenticing. So here you are, young guy, Macaulay Culkin looking kid, going into Apprentice. And what was the experience like?
It was pretty eye-opening. You're going from like normal kid, playing guitar a little bit, but still finishing high school. Like up to that point, like I wasn't involved in athletics past junior high. Like I played basketball in school through junior high, but outside of playing music with my friends, I had a very, very normal like kid in school life. That looks relatively the same for most people. It's a lot harder for other people. It's a lot easier for some other people. Whatever. I was probably somewhere in the middle with my experience in public school. So to go from that to this again at the time, like relatively outside of the box industry, because a tattoo apprenticeship happens inside a tattoo shop. You don't go to like a school for it. So I had just barely been old enough to even walk into one of these places and not get kicked out of it. So to go from getting my first couple tattoos to like, oh no, if you're not in school, you live here and you're going to see everything it is that we do that makes this a job and makes this a career. And, as an apprentice, that has nothing to do with physically doing tattoos. That has to do with like, relearning how to draw. Because there's a huge difference between being good at drawing and being able to design a tattoo. Those are two completely different things. That's something I had to learn immediately. And still am learning to this day for that matter. But the technical stuff too, tattoo machines. Well, what is a tattoo machine? How do you build a tattoo machine? What is it made out of? Tattoo
Because
needles.
that's a thing, right? Don't a lot of tattoo artists build their own machines?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's builders in the industry that don't really tattoo, but the vast majority of machine builders are tattooers or were tattooers at one point. And it's its own part of the industry. You don't have tattoos without tattoo machines.
Right.
Like
You
you don't
you
have
guys are like Jedis building your own lightsabers,
lightsabers. Yeah,
right?
exactly. That's essentially it. They all look different and they all do slightly different things. They're all slightly different colors.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing. And there's different types of tattoo machines. You've got, your traditional coil machine. You have rotary machines. There's a lot of newfangled equipment that I wouldn't even know how to start telling you how it works because I haven't even bothered to tackle those new instruments. I'm a pretty bare bones dude. I kind of like go with what I know, and I don't experiment a lot with tattoo equipment. I use traditional coil machines, and the outside of that, the inks, the needles, the tubes. It's just the tools of the trade. It's like if you were a mechanic or a carpenter. You have your tools. The work doesn't happen without them. You find what works for you. You find what's reliable, and you kind of go with that. But yeah, that's the apprenticeship. It's learning everything in like sterile practices. Obviously, like in a tattoo shop, you're dealing with the same sort of concerns with biohazard and bloodborne pathogens, the things that you would be concerned about in a clinic or a hospital. Obviously, things that most industries don't even have to consider. It's just not a part of the job. So when COVID happened, obviously there was initial shutdown and we didn't work for months, but when we finally went back to work, kind of adopting the new post-COVID or in the middle of COVID practices wasn't that big of an adjustment for tattooers. You know what I mean? That's kind of one of the things that was a little easier for us because that's been our job all along. The
Was it
rest
a
of the
lot more than masks? And maybe just asking, have you been around someone who's sick? Do you have COVID?
right. It was masks, but in some parts of the world they've used masks in tattooing all along. Like that's
Right.
very very prominent in like Japan, in China. Like I think they just use masks, but they do that socially anyway for health reasons. So short of masks and like you said, kind of the same sort of where have you been recently protocol that everybody had to adopt. No, there wasn't social distancing. We kind of changed our system. The front door is locked now. There's no potential for someone to just walk in off the street to inquire about a walk-in tattoo or just come in and see the shop. It's 100% appointment only. We don't. You kind
Is
of just
that
don't.
you guys specifically, or would you say that's across the nation?
That's a lot of shops, not us specifically, but that's the biggest way that our specific shop changed. We weren't a prominent walk-in tattoo shop in the first place, but in the past there was a counter manager, someone who was there to answer the phones and greet people that might just come in off the street, inquiring about a walk-in tattoo or just inquiring about the shop. and that was discontinued coming off of the initial quarantine. We no longer have a counter manager and the door's locked. So if you're coming in, if you're arriving, you're there for a consultation or your tattoo appointment. So we all know exactly who's going to be there, exactly at what time. We all know who's working any given day. We don't allow guests right now for the people that are getting tattooed. It's pretty common for people to bring company with them when they get
Sure.
tattooed. It's generally a social and communal environment. But we completely axed that for the time being, for the foreseeable future. So it's one tattooer and their client, however many tattooers are there that day. And there's only 5 of us in our shop. So even if everyone's there working at the same time with a client, that's still only 10 people. And it's incredibly rare that all of us are there working at the same time. So it's a pretty concise operation right now, and it's going to stay that way for a while.
How many artists did you say are at the shop?
There's 5 of us.
So there's 5 of you guys, and then you spread it out schedule wise. So let me I'm going to frame this question because I kind of want to get your trajectory into learning your craft. So when I started airbrushing t-shirts, there was probably a 6-month period of time before I kind of had a basic view of the craft and the tool and working with it. And then learning lettering, you can come along, but I think it was about a 3-year arc where my lettering, I had a level of mastery in it.
Sure.
And control. And then after that, it was kind of like, all right, now I'm just growing, and maybe over a 10-year period, the level of quality of my work just kind of it reached a different level of mastery. So I'm
Sure.
wondering, how was that trajectory for you?
I mean, similar. When you first start tattooing, again, the thing about tattooing is like you can be like an incredibly gifted artist going into tattooing and not know how to translate into using the equipment to make that a tattoo. It's just such a strange medium to get into, and some people just never can quite figure out how to make that transition. At the very least, it's very difficult at first, and you're incredibly limited in what you are able to accomplish the first few years. You're not taking on these massive custom pieces for people. The first few years is doing very small, very simple, not terribly demanding pieces, because that's really all that you can wrap your head around, and that's all that you're capable of at the time. And you're still learning how to do clean lines. You're still learning how to apply shading and coloring without doing excessive damage to someone's skin. Like you've got this machine that's driving needles into skin, and there's a window of opportunity there to like accomplish a tattoo successfully before you can overwork a body part. I mean, you're creating a wound, and you can't sit there and just keep creating elaborating on that wound all day. You've got to get the thing done. So there's a lot to learn just to kind of get a feel for the form itself. And once you do that, you slowly start to kind of take on, bigger projects, bigger body parts. But all along, your design instincts start to develop in tandem with that. And, a larger body part in a larger composition, a more complex composition, requires a lot more moving pieces, kind of put all that together. And, you can see your portfolio over the years progress as far as like how sophisticated your approach is now versus the way it was. You show me kind of like, say I did like a half sleeve with a bunch of flowers and a snake 10 years ago. It's not going to look anything like the one I do tomorrow. You figure things out along the way. You figure out what worked. You figure out what makes sense for like the kind of artist you are and your style. You really quickly figure out what doesn't work. And that is just the true nature of tattooing. It's like ideally always getting better. Like you should really, the goal isn't to like get to the point where you're like, I'm done. Like that's not, I don't think the point of any art form. It's like you constantly progress until there's nowhere else to go. Uh, so ideally basically your overall approach as an artist grows simultaneously with your knowledge and your experience with the physical technician side of being a tattooer. Because those are two kind of different things that merge in the middle to make you a tattoo artist. I don't really like generally use the term tattoo artist. It sounds a little redundant to me, honestly. I think we typically use tattooer more often. Don't really say like photograph photographer. It's just kind of, but you get the point. So yeah, you're constantly kind of weighing the designer in you versus the technician in you and figuring out where those things are efficient and where you get the job done, you know?
When then you have to be another part, I imagine you have to be another part, uh, service provider, therapist.
Sure.
Like,
Sure.
and that's a whole lesson in itself to learn, or a craft, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that actually, that's a really good point. And that kind of maybe is the biggest sticking point in the tattoo industry for like tattooers who are really, really progressive and proactive and successful, and ones that maybe struggle more. The social part of it is enormous if you expect to grow a clientele basis and a reputation. There's a lot of really good tattooers that aren't the most socially polished individuals. Let's just put it that way. It is a skill, but I think it inherently is a personality type too. And I think if you're like not really wired in a manner where you just kind of generally are a people person and like to spend time with people and get to know people, and you just generally have an approachable and pleasant demeanor, I don't know that there's a lot you can do with the skill building part of it. There's some unpleasant people in the industry that have all this technical skill in the world, but have a hard time maintaining clientele because, well, they're not that much fun to be around. And that's any industry. I mean, that's not
Sure,
specific to
sure.
tattooing, but there is a reputation in the tattoo industry for kind of like gruff, unpleasant tattooers. You hear it all the time. So I really hold the social, communicative, inviting part of being just that, like you said, like a service person. You are coming to me for an experience. Inherently the tattoo part is like what you leave with and the part you want to be the happiest with, but you want to keep coming back because, I mean, if I'm going to do this thing that hurts and it's unpleasant in that way, and it can be expensive, so it can be unpleasant in that way, at the very least I'm enjoying spending time with the person I'm spending time with. And I've gotten to be really good friends with a lot of people that just started out as clients. A lot of people, like some of my favorite people, some of my best friends started out as people I just tattooed. I mean, my friend Mike, who's in my band, he's the main songwriter and the lead singer of the band. He's become a really, really close musical collaborator and truly one of my best friends. I started doing like Japanese style tattoos on him randomly one day when I first moved to Kansas City, and now about 10 years later we're like releasing our first album together. Those sorts of things can happen if you're open to being human alongside the humans you're working with. If you have this kind of wall between you and the person you're collaborating with, that can't happen. So yeah, I think it's entirely important. I mean, people go back to the same hairstylist over and over again because they like that person.
Yeah.
So you'd think you'd want the same level of like trust and familiarity and kind of just like a general sense of like warmth and friendship with the person that you're going to for your tattoos.
Yeah, it's a level of intimacy between you and your canvas,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely, for sure.
And I mean canvas, capital C. I don't mean any disrespect for it, right?
I know exactly what you mean, and that's very much it. And the people you tattoo, they have a sense of pride in the fact that like you're the one that tattoos them. I have many, many like circles of friends and families in the community that I've been tattooing for years. And I know amongst them, not to like talk myself up, but I know amongst them, like one of their things is like they all get tattooed by me. And that's like something they all have in common. And it's like, I think that's fun for them. It's like, I'm gonna go see Mikey. And they're like, oh, cool, tell him hi. And it's like, that's just another thing that like makes a community a community, or like a group of friends and family, a group of friends and family. Like that's our guy, or that's our person that does that. It's more than the tattoo. It's a family thing, you know. I think that makes people more comfortable no matter what.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
When in, and maybe this was before your apprenticeship, but when in your apprenticeship did it become clear you could make a career out of this?
When Jason, the guy that was apprenticing me, told me to quit my job at Red Lobster, and I was starting on the floor in 2 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that was it. Until he literally said, you know, I basically just had to like do a few tattoos successfully.
Yeah.
And you know, at that point, I'm just tattooing like people he knows and like my friends that don't mind getting like a subpar tattoo from an apprentice. That's how all apprentices start. But yeah, there was a point where he basically, I think I did a tattoo on his like brother-in-law essentially, and he took a look at it and he's like, "Okay, you can quit your day job. You're gonna start tattooing here 4 days a week in 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks," and that was it. Like basically hired me. The apprenticeship was over and I was going to be a tattooer. And it's kind of like anything. It's like anybody starting a new job, you know, the stakes maybe like are a little higher in this than some jobs. Cause like, oh, I know how to bread shrimp. I'm not sure that I know how to tattoo yet, but he said I do. So like I've been tattooing for 18 years now, and it's like thousands of hours and hundreds of people, but I still remember my first day actually like coming in. It's like there's just like this moment. I was supposed to open the shop that day. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning. I was the first one there. I had my key. They gave me a key to the tattoo shop, which I thought was crazy. And I came in and opened it and turned on some music and just sat down in what was now my room, my station. No one was there yet. And I just kind of sat in the chair and I was like, I hope I know how to do this. Like I'm doing this now. And then it was just a one day at a time thing. And now 18 years later, I still have the same job.
Yeah.
I guess you call that a career at that point. But it's funny, there's still like a first moment, right? And that goes for everybody. And it's like you sink or swim. Fortunately, like the second thing happened, you know, because it could have very well not worked out, but it really did.
But I don't know. I mean, it sounded like you were determined and you were committed and you knew. I mean, mistakes could have been made. I guess, that could have been it if it was a total disaster, right? And he's like, you need to go. But I think you never know. But I think at that point, you know, again, belief. He had a belief in you that he's like, hey, were you paid through your apprenticeship?
No, you do not get paid for an apprenticeship, and in some circumstances, you have to pay for an apprenticeship.
Yeah, interesting.
So I was just fortunate that I didn't have to pay for it. And that's all completely relative to who is apprenticing you and like what their system is. There's no standard for that. It's from shop to shop. It's different. So it was just a matter of coming in and learning the ropes. And, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, if somebody's apprenticing you in their shop, their goal is to like make a tattooer to work for them to then make them money. Not to take any kind of like, you know, personal relationship or like kind of going back to talking about the encouragement aspect of it, like teaching somebody and that being a valuable experience, but it's still a business. They're making an employee at that.
There's overhead and all that. And was there a clear expectation through the apprenticeship that, hey, I'm training you so one day you can get on the floor and have your own spot and then you're going to work with me for a while?
Yeah, that's, you know, if you are doing an apprenticeship, that is the end goal. You know, any shop that doesn't inherently need that as an end goal just won't do apprenticeships.
Right.
Like our shop doesn't do apprenticeships.
Right.
Nobody in our shop does apprenticeships. We're not trying to create more tattooers to bring in to work for us. Our shop is the size it is, and we've decided 5 people is appropriate and necessary. And
Right.
with all the things that we're trying to do and how busy we are, well, none of us have the time to give the appropriate amount of attention to an apprentice to do that justice. You also don't want to waste somebody's time if you're not like really in the position to give them a good apprenticeship. So
Right.
you need to be honest with yourself and honest with anybody who would inquire about that's the case.
Now, do you need to be licensed as a tattoo? I was going to say tattoo artist. Do you need to be licensed as a tattooer, or does the shop manage that, and then you have some training?
It 100% depends on the state you work in and live in. In Missouri, yes, tattooers have to be licensed by the state, and the shop itself has to have its own up-to-date business license as a tattoo shop. In some states, that's not the case. Like there is no governing body that dictates, okay, you have been licensed by this entity. And, like you can argue that it's all bureaucracy or whatever. But what it does accomplish in the state of Missouri, at least, is there's at least a checks and balances system for incoming apprentices that they have accomplished A, B, and C, and have been approved by who is apprenticing them to become a professional tattooer. They've at least learned these things. And when you're dealing with, especially like biohazard, the health aspects of that, you'd like to think that they've been taught those things and are well educated in those things. So I think it's obviously a good thing. It's good for the public that's getting tattooed to know that there is an entity in Missouri that has those requirements, and it's like you have to at least have this going on to be a tattooer. Whether you survive as a tattooer after that is up to you, but we've got this under control. So
reasonable and appropriate standards, probably a good thing.
I think so.
Right.
Everybody else can decide what they feel about that, but Missouri does require that.
Are you able to share like the cost of that, like what it costs for you to be licensed as a tattooer in your state?
It's like every 2 years, it's like $100 to renew your license.
Oh, okay.
It's nothing crazy. And as an established tattooer, they're just like, they're also keeping up with like, have you collected a felony in the last 2 years?
Okay,
like stuff like that. There's ways that you can get your license suspended.
Okay.
So it's not to say once you have one, you are guaranteed to maintain one.
Right.
As long as you like stay on the straight and narrow and you continue to do your job right, they will, without much interrogation, give you a new license every 2 years if you pay your $100. But you can potentially jeopardize your tattoo license if you don't behave yourself. So I think that's a good thing.
And then do they ask you about like health practices? Do you have to take like a test on how you manage or handle or anything like that?
That's not generally a reoccurring thing. It's up to like local health departments to come in and check out the shop to make sure all of the sterile practices are up to date. You've got an autoclave and an ultrasonic situation that handles the cleaning of tools. It's very much like a clinic or a hospital. Like, whatever physical instruments and tools are reused to accomplish the job have to be cleaned properly. There's a system for that, and the equipment that is used to clean them, that stuff has to be up to date. We send in spore tests to make sure that the autoclave is running properly.
Okay.
So it's a whole thing for sure.
Yeah.
But as long as the shop is approved in that manner, the people that work under that roof are also approved.
Cool. And how do you figure out pricing for a tattoo?
That is relative. But generally speaking, it's kind of an industry standard thing. And that even depends on like what part of the country you live in. So, there's like a shop minimum concept that is just kind of like in Kansas City. Well, what's the average shop minimum? Is it $60? Is it $80? All that means is like if you were to walk in off the street or even via appointment schedule for a tattoo that is a very minimal, doesn't take very long, even as little as 5 to 10 minutes, there is a minimal amount of charge for that. And
Right.
that's really relative to like setting up your station for it, getting out all the
Sure.
equipment, but it's simply to like regulate, okay, we don't do like $20 tattoos.
Right.
If you are occupying this portion of this day's allotted time to tattoo, this is the least you will be charged for it. And then from there, it's again just completely relative to what the artist thinks is necessary to compensate them for the time to accomplish a project. If that's a single session tattoo that takes them 3 hours, it's up to them to decide how much that is. I personally charge $150 an hour, and I'm appointment only. So, if you come in and get tattooed for 3 hours, then you pay X amount of money, and that's just kind of across the board. But in saying that, I literally only charge for the physical tattooing. So that is, you are getting charged for the time I am physically tattooing you. I account for breaks. If we take a 10-minute break, I don't charge you for a 10-minute break. You don't get charged for me designing the thing in advance. The time it takes me to place a stencil, stenciling is, what you do before the physical tattooing. I don't charge for any of the legwork. And my reasoning for that is that is my own process. Sometimes I'll go through a couple different drafts of a concept before I have something that I feel is appropriate to tattoo on somebody. And then even down to the stenciling of something, it's like, if I place a stencil, it's not quite right, I need to remove it, I need to place it again. Depending on the size of the piece and the demands of the piece, that can take some time. So I eliminate any prior to tattooing legwork or design work, so I can take my time with that, and the client isn't like looking at their watch going like, why is this taking so long? Why is this taking, we haven't even started tattooing and I've been here for 30 minutes already.
Right.
That's not figured into it. But as you get further along in your career, you have to kind of assess how much time you spend drawing at home, because all of my design work, all of my drawing work for my appointments happens at home. When I'm at the shop, I'm tattooing. So it's one of the jobs where you actually have homework outside of the job part. So
how many billable hours would you say you average a week?
I generally have 2 large scale appointments a day. Sometimes that varies. Sometimes I'll have a random day where I've got like a couple small ones and a big one. So every day is a little different, but I generally work 4 days a week. I'm usually there for about 10 hours on the days I'm there. Sometimes I'll work a 5th day. It depends. If I were to estimate, probably 20 hours a week is actually literally spent tattooing. Yeah. And then definitely another, the other 10 to 20 is like everything else that goes into like designing and emailing and corresponding. Like I do all that stuff myself. I don't have like a secretary or anything like that. So everything else that happens around that has to happen in the same week. So yeah, it's definitely at the least a 40-hour a week job, if not more.
And then you pay for your own equipment. Do you pay for your own ink?
Yeah. Definitely pay for all of our own supplies and materials. There's kind of general medical supplies, if you will, or just kind of like setup supplies that the shop just has on hand for everybody.
Rubber gloves, masks, stuff like that.
We generally get our own gloves too. But like paper towels and like tape and like the green soap solution we use to make up our bottles of soap, which is like the soap solution we use to kind of do the tattoos to the application process. The ointments we use, ink caps that we physically put the ink in. Like there's a whole setup situation and a significant portion of that is actually provided by the shop.
Okay.
But the materials that make our job really personal to the individual artists, it's like, what inks do we like to use? What needles do we like to use? What machines are our machines? Those are the things that fall on us, because those are very, very personal. Maybe this person really, really is like loyal to this brand of ink. Maybe this person prefers this. So that's all definitely like stuff we handle ourselves.
Yeah. Now, when I was airbrushing t-shirts, I had my own shop once for a short season, and that's a whole different animal, right? But I would try and find a shop that existed where it would make sense for me to go in an airbrush. And the first place I found, I struck a deal with them that was 80-20. So I made 80% of whatever I airbrushed, and I bring my own paint, my own equipment, and all that. And then the next shop I was at, it ended up being 60-40. And
Sure.
and so is that your arrangement with the shop you're at, where it's like they get a certain percentage, or do you,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And as like a new tattooer, that's usually like a 50-50 thing.
sure.
And that just increases over time.
Right.
When I moved from Mercy Seat to Windhorse a couple years ago, I knew that I wanted to be at Windhorse. There wasn't any issue there. I was already like really good friends with the owner and everyone that worked there, so it was a natural fit. But the business side of it was like, I have to get paid this much, because
Right.
that's I got paid there, and I just
Right.
can't come here for less. And he's like, oh no, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
So that's respected. And again, I'm going on like 19 years now, so
Yeah.
and
You've
if
achieved a level of mastery, and it's like you're a plug and play guy.
exactly, and that the owner of Windhorse knew he was bringing on somebody that had an established clientele.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm gonna do X amount of business every week, regardless, without fail. He can expect this much production out of me, thus this much contribution, to the shop. So he
Right.
knew he knew how much money that I would essentially make the shop, to put it in crude terms.
Yeah.
And that has to be, that has to work for both parties, and in our case it absolutely does.
So, Mikey, thanks so much for all of that information, and just sharing. I mean, so much of yourself and your journey. It's so cool. Um, so, I guess I want to ask you as the last question is what would be your advice to anybody who wants to become a tattoo artist and they don't know where to start?
Sure. The Especially nowadays, now that like the climate has changed, as far as like getting a tattoo apprenticeship is incredibly challenging, and there's a lot of competition for just that. The first thing you absolutely have to do is get tattooed. There's no way around it. Like, you have to really make a priority out of getting tattooed. Whether that be with like one person, or become like a collector of tattoos. At both of the shops I've worked at in Kansas City, each shop had like a couple clients who kind of made a habit out of getting tattooed by almost everyone there. And I always thought that was really cool. Like, and in a healthy shop environment, there's no weird sense of like competition or territory there. Like, you should never feel territorial over a person in any circumstance, obviously. But if you like spend a lot of time tattooing somebody, and then you come in one day and they're getting tattooed by someone else, if you don't have a healthy relationship with the other people in your shop, or you yourself don't have the most healthy view about relationships, there's potential for like a jealousy, or kind of like, why are you getting tattooed by this person? That doesn't exist at our shop, and it really shouldn't exist at any shop. People should obviously have the freedom to get tattooed by whomever they want. And I think it's really cool that there's like patrons that just like the idea of collecting from the entire staff of a shop. It's just like, they get tattooed at that shop. Everything I have is this person did this and this person did that. That's a really, really cool thing. But to get back to your question, if you're not getting tattooed, if you're not committed to it, if you're not motivated by it, if you're not in and around the shop and people aren't used to seeing you there and people don't really know you, just kind of like cold calling a shop or showing up at the door, I'm like, you guys do apprenticeships? It's just not going to get you anywhere. There's a lot of people that put in a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of pain into like physically being a part of the environment, a part of the business in a sense, that are surely going to find themselves in that position before somebody who doesn't really even like get tattooed would. So I definitely understand like the excitement about tattooing right now, and people really like seeing it as a very cool way to make a living. And again, like a lot of that comes from just people observing like kind of how it's presented in these TV shows. And as you stated before, a lot of that's really dramatized and there's a lot of misinformation and all of that, which is unfortunate, but you could say that about any show, about any other industry. That's just television. So yeah, if you truly think tattooing is something you might want to pursue, get to know the artists, get to know the shops, get tattooed, ask questions a little bit while you're there, but don't, kind of be strategic about it, be a little diplomatic about it, kind of like get to know these people, and then maybe slowly reveal after a while that, you yourself are an artist and you get tattooed because you love art and you love tattoos, and you do have a curiosity about it, and get some advice. I myself have never actually apprenticed somebody in the traditional sense, but I've had at least 3 people that started out as clients, that then became really good friends, who eventually over time started kind of asking me about it. And I had to be really honest with them in the sense, it's like, I'm sorry, I'm really just not in the position to apprentice you for what I said earlier. Even outside of tattooing, I've got the music thing and I've got a family, and it's just like, I would not be able to give you the attention that you would deserve. And I'm not going to pretend I could, but if you go to talk to this person, maybe do that. Or I try to give them as much advice as possible, enough, as much constructive information and motivation as possible in my limited position. And 2 out of those 3 people are now tattooers. They found a way. One of which is my really good friend Danny, who I work with now. She was one of my first like regular clients when I first moved to Kansas City, and we became really good friends. And now, like 10 years later, we work together. Another one, my buddy Jordan. When I started tattooing him, he had like 1 tattoo, I think. Now he's got 2 sleeves. His whole front is done. Whole neck is done. I'm working on his full back piece, and he tattoos at another shop.
He's all in.
He's got more tattoos than I do. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. He went all in. He did whatever it took. He talked to whoever it took. He got moved around a little bit and finally found a home in a place where he feels good. And he's doing it, and she's doing it. And it's being committed to it in its entirety, not just like, oh, this is a cool thing to do. How fast can I do this? It's just not the right attitude to have for it. It's a very difficult thing to get into. It's a very difficult thing to do. And you have to be really, really self-motivated to be successful at it. So it takes a lot of like finding your own way, but asking a lot of questions for sure.
That's awesome. Hey man, thank you so much for being my guest. I really have appreciated our conversation and your transparency about your journey. And we got connected by our mutual buddy Dave Starr, and
Thanks, Dave.
I'm grateful to Dave too. And it's just really good stuff. Thanks, Mikey.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you inviting me on, and I'm always excited to kind of like look back and try to remember how I got here myself. I don't necessarily always think on those things on a day-to-day basis, and it's really nice to discuss it with somebody. And I appreciate your time.
Yeah, you got it, man. I appreciate your time. It's all my pleasure, and it is cool to look back on where you've come from. So, if people want to see your work, if they want to learn more about you, where can they go?
So much like the rest of the the modern world, Instagram is like the first place. You can find me at Mikey Wheeler Tattooer, TATTOOER, on Instagram, and I'm at Windhorse Tattoo. That's the name of the shop. It's in Midtown in Kansas City. That website is Windhorse Rising. It's currently in the middle of a little bit of a rebuild, but that should be the facelift should be done over the next couple months. But it's still, I believe, a functional site, if you will. And then email to contact me for tattoo inquiry. It's the same as the Instagram. It's mikeywheelertattooer@gmail.com.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Mikey, it was so cool to have you as my guest. I really appreciate your time and your expertise and you sharing your experiences. I love that you are a hard worker. Like you show up and you do the work. Whether it's making sandwiches that then put you into the proximity of a the owner of a tattoo shop and a tattooer himself who invites you in to become an apprentice in his business and in the craft. And I love that you apprenticed. I love that you went to work under artists who were already established. And that's such a great way to learn. It's such a great way to learn. And you did it for a period of time without any pay until you got hired to do the work. I think that that's a bit of a lost pathway into your business or your craft that people for centuries would go to work for artisans and they wouldn't be paid. They would be brought on and they would learn. I mean, that would be their payment, right? Would be you're expected to learn and if you make it, great. If you don't, then you're off to do something else. But eventually you would become a part of the business because you would have worked your way up. It was a different approach to college, right? Because you are working on building up your experience until you reach a level of mastery over your craft. I mean, there are different levels of mastery, right? But then you would have a knowledge that would have been attained that would allow you to become a practitioner of your craft. And college is similar to that, but different in that this is a little bit more real world trade, performance, trade school kind of an approach. But I really love it. And I guess what I love about it is just as I said, it gives you real world experience. You get your feet wet in not just the actual practice of tattooing in this case, but in working with customers, in prepping to work for customers or with customers, in working with the shop that you're going to work with, and kind of getting the lay of the land and how business operates. And we don't always get that in formal education, right? So I think and I'm not here to poo-poo formal education. I've gone to college to some length. I don't have a degree, but it hasn't held me back in any meaningful way. And I think that there is just a benefit to both. And I say, go get your degree if that's what you want to do. And if you've got the money and if you've weighed the benefits and the cost of it, fantastic. But I would also say, if you can, while you're schooling, get a real world education in the business world, in the functional application of your artistic skill, man, that is going to take you an awful long way. And I just love Mikey's attitude too. He's just a good guy, nice guy. He wants to serve people. He wants to do well. He wants to create art. He wants them to be happy. And I think there's a lot to be said for that too. If you have an attitude of joy around your craft and you like people And, we're all going to have difficult people, but if you can manage and handle those difficult people well, you're going to do pretty well in your career. So, so with that being said, I again just want to thank Mikey for being my guest, my first tattooer that I've had on the show, and just love to hear about how he has gone about his journey. It's just cool stuff. I love all you artists out there. So many different people, so many different approaches, and yet there seem to be similar approaches that line up and work. And there's a lot of common sense and common practices that we can use as the foundation in our own journeys. So, with that being said, that's it for this week's episode. Take that next step, go after that next thing, be courageous where you need to be courageous. And I look forward to meeting you in the future or seeing your work and then asking you to be on this show to see, hey, what is it that you do? What do you do that is different from me? And what approaches do you take that are the same but are different? Things that I can learn from. Love to be a learner, huh? All right. Have a great day. See you next time.